It takes some world-class mental gymnastics to believe Christians are intolerable bigots, but Muslims are just hunky-dory. Or that blacks should be treated with kid gloves because they're an oppressed minority, but blacks who don't buy into the ideology of victimhood should be denigrated based on their race and called things like Uncle Toms. Or believing that whites against massive non-stop third world immigration into white countries like Germany or Sweden are evil Nazis, but all non-white countries are allowed to be homogenous. Not too many leftists are calling Tibetans Nazis for opposing diversity and wanting to keep their nation and culture intact. The left's endless double standards are pretty baffling if you don't understand their motives and agenda. So, in a nutshell, leftists believe Western civilization is rooted in oppressive, unequal, racist, sexist, patriarchal, evil, capitalist, imperialist systems. And their agenda is to dismantle those systems, in effect to dismantle Western civilization to its core, and reconstruct it in their image. So if you look at it from that premise, their double standards and their positions actually make sense. From changing the definition of words so they align with their ideology, to targeting an ethnic group with collective crimes, to the mass importation of non-white immigrants so to change the demographics and culture of Western countries are all logical means of deconstructing Western society. And by the way, by Western countries or Western civilization, I'm talking about cultures that have its roots in the Greco-Roman world, heavily influenced by the traditions of the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Enlightenment. Simply put, societies that are directly derived from and influenced by Christian European culture. Now, it's also important to know that the purveyors of leftist ideology aren't imbeciles. They're not just green-haired college kids with too much time on their hands. And because they're smart people is why Western civilization is in crisis right now. They understand how to propagandize, how to gain social control, and they understand that in a democracy, undermining Western values and demonizing those who stand in their way can be more effective than violent revolution. And that's why politics isn't about conservative versus liberal principles anymore, or simply about the left versus the right. It's about the left versus the West. Now, here's where the rubber hits the road. It just can't be overstated that the biggest issue of our time and the biggest threat to the principle of life that our civilization has been built on is mass third world immigration into Western countries. Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, explained this in an epic speech in 2016 when he said, "Today in Europe it's forbidden to speak the truth. It's forbidden to say that Europe is threatened by migration. It's forbidden to say that tens of millions are ready to set out in our direction. It's forbidden to say mass immigration brings crime and terror to our countries. It's forbidden to point out that the masses arriving from other civilizations endanger our way of life, our culture, our customs, and our Christian traditions. It's forbidden to point out that those who arrived earlier have already built up their own new, separate world for themselves, with its own laws and ideals, which is forcing apart the thousand-year-old structure of Europe. It's forbidden to point out that this is not an accidental and unintentional chain of consequences, but a pre-planned, orchestrated operation of a mass of people directed towards us. It's forbidden to say that in Brussels they are concocting schemes to transport foreigners as quickly as possible and to settle them here among us. It's forbidden to point out that the purpose of settling people here is to reshape the religious and cultural landscape of Europe and to re-engineer its ethnic foundations, thereby eliminating the last barrier to globalism, the nation-state. It's forbidden to say that Brussels is now devouring more and more slices of our national sovereignty, and that in Brussels many are now making a plan for a United States of Europe. It's absolutely no coincidence Marxists have planned for the destruction of the nation-state for over 100 years, and that European leftists want to do the same thing today. And using mass migration to erode the nation-state so to create a centralized superstate is hardly a new concept either. Now, just so we're on the same page, a nation is a population with a shared heritage, which includes a common language, history, religion, and ancestry. A state is a defined territory with its own government. A nation-state is a state that encompasses mainly one nation of people. For example, the Jews are a nation, so before the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, they were a stateless nation. And now, even though quite a few Arabs live in Israel and are Israeli citizens, since Israel is a Jewish country for Jews, it's a nation-state, as opposed to a multinational state, which are states that comprise of more than one nation of people, like Canada and America. So then, is America not really one nation under God? In the classical sense of the term nation, I'm going to say no. In Latin, nation means not only birth and origin, but tribe and race of people. But in the sense that a nation can be a population bound by a common identity, who share a national language, history, and culture, yeah, America can be one nation. And that common identity, even if it's not in its purest form where there's a shared ethnic ancestry, creates social unity and cohesion. And social cohesion gives people a sense of connection, of belonging, and of trust. And what makes people feel bound to support their nation, its norms, beliefs, and values. Social cohesion is probably the most important part of someone's life that they don't even think about.
I mean, they'll either, stick it to you and actually start talking about it like you may or may not have been expecting, or they'll, just think, oh, the nerve of this kid, and wave you off. But the people that, if you can show that you really love them, that you really care about them, without overstepping those boundaries as you progress in the relationship, lifelong friends, like deep, actual relationships. There are people of order. There's a way things are. There's a way we do things, and it works. So let's do it that way. And the more that I was there, the more I just thought, I love this. The more I thought, this is what I've been wanting to have like my entire life back home in America. People who think this way, people who act this way, who understand this.
When Donald Trump was critical of immigration from shithole countries like El Salvador and Somalia in favor of immigrants from countries like Norway, he was called a racist. Again. And our society is supposed to reflect the age of reason. But thanks to the left, we're regressing to a time of superstitious hysteria when resentful harpies got rid of their rivals simply by making an unfounded accusation, instead of which, now it's racist. But if we look at Trump's sentiments on immigration objectively, we see that 91% of Somali immigrants use welfare, and immigrants from Central America and Mexico use welfare at a rate of 73%. As a point of reference, 30% of the U.S. general native-born population uses some form of welfare. In contrast, only 26% of European immigrants use some form of welfare. So according to leftist logic, if you prefer immigrant groups who'll use welfare at a lower rate and work and pay taxes at a higher rate, you're a racist. And by the way, the reason I'm talking about welfare usage of immigrants when I was just talking about the leftist agenda of getting enough power to turn our civilization into a dystopia is mass immigration from third world countries changes the amount of people dependent on the state. And people dependent on the state don't vote to diminish the state. 81% of foreign-born Hispanics in America want a bigger government. 72% of second-generation Hispanics want a bigger government. And third generation and beyond vote Democrat 2-1. In contrast, only 37% of whites in America want a bigger government. If you look at how demographic changes can affect elections, it's pretty startling. For example, if the Hispanic population in 2012 was what it was in 1980, Mitt Romney would have beat Obama and won the election by a landslide. And the left is well aware of this, and that's why they even fight having a merit-based immigration system. They want power through votes. They don't want a Danish engineer that's sick of spending 80% of his income on taxes as an immigrant. They want people who will vote for more taxes and more government. So it's no wonder left-wing politicians are applauding whites becoming the minority in America by around 2040.
Not only our Muslim communities, but African communities, Asian communities, Hispanic communities, and the wave still continues. It's not going to stop, nor should we want it to stop. As a matter of fact, it's one of the things I think we can be most proud of. So there's a second thing in that black box, an unrelenting stream of immigration, non-stop. nonstop. Folks like me who were Caucasian of European descent, for the first time in 2017, will be in an absolute minority in the United States of America. Absolute minority. Fewer than 50% of the people in America, from then and on, will be white European stock. That's not a bad thing. That's a source of our strength. And so,
democracy is about the open debate of ideas, not stuffing the ballot with government-dependent people. And that's what the left is doing in America, and will continue to do until those of us who want to keep the foundational principles of America intact are outvoted forever. Now, let me shift back to Europe, the wellspring of Western society. The argument Angela Merkel makes for the mass importation of migrants is that most of Europe has below replacement level fertility rates. Replacement fertility is a number of childbirths per woman that is required to replace the existing population. For a couple to replace themselves in a population, they need to have 2 kids. Actually, accounting for mortality, it's like 2.1 kids in a first world country. Birth rates vary by country, and the native German birth rate is 1.6. Most migrants being led into Europe come from cultures with very high birth rates. For example, the overall Muslim birth rate in Europe is 3.1. So, that's not a solution to a future labor shortage, that's a recipe for replacing the native population. Let me illustrate. If Europe closed its borders today and didn't accept one more immigrant, Europe's Muslim population would still increase by 40% by 2050. If Europe continues its current migration policy, France and Germany will be over 20% Muslim, and in Sweden, 1 in 3 people will be Muslim by 2050. And due to exponential increase, not long after that, Muslims will actually begin to become the majority in some Western European countries. By the way, the reason I'm talking about Muslim migrants specifically is because the overwhelming majority of migrants entering Europe are from Muslim-majority countries east and south of Europe. A population voluntarily replacing itself is unprecedented in human history, and is seen as insane by nations not influenced by leftist ideology. Japan's fertility rate has been below replacement levels since their post-World War II baby boom, and they have an aging population. If I remember right, the average age in Japan now is 47 or 48. But because the Japanese see unity in a unified people, replacing its population through mass immigration as a solution to low birth rates is not an option. Instead, they're simply weathering the storm. And if Japan follows its current immigration policies, it'll still be culturally, religiously, linguistically Japanese in 100 years. They'll retain their national identity, their social cohesion, along with their customs, traditions, and history. Same goes for other countries with sane immigration policies, like Poland. Michel Houellebecq wrote a best-selling political satire in 2015 called Submission. It's about a near-future France where the fundamentalist leader of a Muslim political party defeats the National Front Party and is elected president of France with the help of the Socialist Party. The Sharia is implemented and non-Muslim discrimination ensues. In the book, the main character's Jewish girlfriend tells him she's going to Israel because things have gotten so bad in France, and he says to her, "I don't have an Israel to go to." That passage is particularly disturbing because it shows the consequences of one generation throwing away the culture that had been given to them from their ancestors who paid with their blood to pass that culture on intact. A culture is not about us here and now. It's a pact between our ancestors, us who are alive, and our future generations. And to break that pact by giving our children a Vienna that resembles Mogadishu is about the most evil thing someone can do. And nationalists, who are just people that want to preserve their nation and its culture, understand this. But through psychological warfare, through propaganda and censorship, through decades of social conditioning via the government, the schools, politics, and media, nationalistic ideals have been demonized by leftists because nationalism is what stands in the way of the leftist agenda. Describing Germans as white people who share a common ancestry is damn near a hate crime now. To the leftist globalist, anyone can be German, or Danish, or a Swede. Heritage means nothing, and this loss of national identity makes national borders seem irrelevant, and open borders assumes the loss of independence. Here's an example of leftist propaganda that was all over Swedish television.
Det finns ingen väg tillbaka.
Sverige blir aldrig som det varit.
Europa är i förändring och Sverige behövs som en trygg plats för människor på flykt.
Nu måste vi söka vägar framåt och hitta ett sätt för alla att leva tillsammans.
Det är dags att inse att nya svenskar kommer att ta plats.
Med kultur, språk och vanor.
Och det är dags att se det som en positiv kraft.
Att vara svensk måste få vara mer än hudfärg och födelseort.
Det måste få vara du, jag och alla tillsammans.
Det är inte bara nya svenskar som ska integreras.
Alla behöver integreras, även etablerade svenskar.
Integration handlar om ömsesidighet.
Låt oss skapa en framtid
Som bygger på lika delar realitet och framtidstro.
Låt oss bygga ett land
Där vi sätter hat och rädsla åt sidan.
Vi har alla det nya landet inom oss.
I våra synsätt, tankar och handlingar.
Det är dags att vi tillsammans formar ett land
som är stolt, inkluderande och hållbart. Något nytt. Det nya landet.
So this is blatantly telling Swedes they need to get over the fact that Sweden is not their country anymore. And only in a white nation is a message like that not considered reprehensible, even by the left. European nation-states are our home, and there is no place to go if we open our home to the world and it becomes unlivable. Europeans are already having to flee parts of their home. Molenbeek was a beautiful old Flemish village, but is now 40% Islamic and is where terrorist attacks are planned, including the Jewish Museum attack in Brussels and the Paris attacks in 2015, and where a surviving Paris attack jihadist returned to for refuge from an international manhunt. And if you're not cool with this transformation because of leftist propaganda, you're a racist, because diversity is our strength. And through this conditioning, whites are being convinced to accept their own displacement and celebrate everyone but their own people. To be clear, international leftists don't want mass immigration because they love immigrants, but because they want to change society. And we're not against mass immigration because we hate immigrants, but because we don't want our society to change. And you can't transform the demographics of a society without also having a cultural, economic, and political transformation. Period.
Because I mean, I get this question or comment a lot, of course, when I talk about this stuff. A lot of the Jews that I've talked to seem to be very pro-immigration, but not to Israel. Like, do you think that Israel should be taking a lot of Syrian refugees in?
It's probably not in their self-interest.
It's not what I asked.
Man, that's hard.
Not really.
Probably. I mean,
yes or no?
Probably not.
Why?
Huh?
Why?
Well,
Don't you all value diversity? Where's your multiculturalism preferences? I mean, why is it bad?
Well, because they sort of want to kill the people that they would immigrate to.
Okay, so but wait a minute. Hang on, man.
Yeah.
Didn't you just give me a whole speech about not judging people collectively? And innocent until proven guilty, my friend? Oh, wait, is that only for Christians? Is that only for white people? When it comes to your country, things get a little different, right?
I mean, well, I'm not saying that they have a right to not let him in. I'm just saying it's probably not in their interest to do it.
Come on. You know you're squirming, right? I don't mean to be mean, but you understand this is a bit tough to hear from the outside, right? You people should accept all these Muslims. When it comes to Israel, oh man, they want to kill us. It is terrible. Okay, but then what's wrong with white European Christians being tribal? Why didn't the Jews say, yeah, we can understand it, man. We don't want them in our country either?
Or is it if they go to the West, they're not coming to Israel? Or is it, well, it destabilizes countries that maybe Israel feels in competition to? I don't know the answer. I'm brainstorming, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
People outside, I mean, within the Jewish community, maybe you seemed a bit surprised. Maybe people don't think about it that much. Outside the Jewish community, people kind of notice this, okay, Jews, Israel, Jews. Israel must remain Jewish. It is fundamental. If we let lots of non-Jews in, it's no longer a Jewish country. But then when it comes to Christian countries, it's like, oh yeah, you guys should take everyone who, maybe they hate you, maybe it's completely incompatible, maybe there's Sharia law being proposed in your courts, maybe there are no-go zones, maybe there are terrorists blowing you up, but you guys should take them. Absolutely. When it comes to Israel, we want a big wall and pretty much only Jews, right? I mean, that's, it's a bit of a double standard, which I'm sure you can see. I don't need to labor the point.
No, I agree.
If Jews want Israel to remain Jewish, that's called cultural pride. If white Christians want white Christian countries to remain white Christian, I guess, all white Christians are now evil, racist bigots. It just,
Mm-hmm. No, there's a double standard.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
The bottom line is, mass immigration is being used to erode the nation states, so to dismantle the 1,000-year-old structure of Europe. And that's so Europe can be restructured in accordance with the leftist worldview. And that includes creating a centralized, untransparent, unaccountable, undemocratic superstate. Now, I'm not going to end the video on that note because I don't think the left will succeed. They won't succeed because as socialism fails time and time again because it's incompatible with human nature, trying to strip people of their national identity goes against human nature as well. And people who aren't brainwashed will naturally resist it. People are tribal by nature, if that's even the right word. I think it is. I mean, people care about their own community and nation more than a foreign nation. This is ingrained in us through biological evolution, and some bullshit ideology based on a utopian fantasy won't change that. I did a video last year on the success of Nigerian immigrants in America, and the comments section got flooded with comments from Nigerians all over the world. And the comments all had one thing in common. There was one consistent theme: Niger pride. Nigerians proudly bragging on themselves. And they should. So, even though Nigeria is a relatively shitty country to live in, Nigerians are still proud of their nation as a people. This is human nature, and this is why it's just a matter of time before the EU collapses. The question is, how much damage will it do in the meantime? To quote Viktor Orban once again from that same 2016 speech I read an excerpt from earlier, "The peoples of Europe are slowly awakening and will soon gain ground. Europe's beams that rest on the suppression of truth are creaking and cracking. At last, the peoples of Europe who have been slumbering in abundance and prosperity have understood that the principles of life that Europe is built on are in mortal danger." And Viktor Orban was right, because since he gave that speech, nationalistic parties all over Europe have surged in popularity and made unprecedented gains. Germany's AfD party went from not having enough support to be represented in parliament to becoming Germany's second biggest political force, all in one election cycle. And in Austria, the people flat out took their country back in such a way it shocked everyone. In last October's elections, they kicked out the Social Democrats and elected a new chancellor, the 31-year-old leader of the People's Party, which is the traditional party of Austrian conservatism. And the Nationalist Freedom Party got the second most votes in the election. Naturally, the two parties formed a coalition, creating Austria's biggest right-wing bloc ever. And of course, Austrians were branded Nazis by the left for wanting to preserve the way of life they've built for themselves. And isn't it weird how many Nazis there are all of a sudden? Especially since the Nazis stopped taking membership applications 70-something years ago. And I'm certainly not going to forget to mention the March 4th Italian elections. Italy took their country back as well, as left-wing and establishment parties that had been in power since the end of World War II were drowned by the wave of nationalism, as right-wing and populist parties crushed it. Their current ruling party, the center-left Democrats, got less than 20% of the vote. And of course, a special shout-out to the Visegrad countries, Hungary, Slovakia, the Czech Republic, and Poland. They never gave leftist nonsense a foothold. Shit, they practically just got their countries back from the socialists. They weren't about to voluntarily give up their sovereignty to some other foreign organization, especially one composed of scheming globalists and feminized girly men. When Trump gave his nationalistic speech in Poland last year, American leftists hated it and were bewildered at how enthusiastic the Polish crowd was. I guess they don't know much about Poland. Poland doesn't hate itself, and unlike leftists, they love their flag and appreciate and celebrate it. Keep an eye on Europe, folks. Things are going to get very interesting soon. Thanks for watching, and until next time, tschüss.